Welcome to another conversation in the FM Expert series. Today I'm joined by Nick Fox. Nick, great to see you.
Hi, Beth. Thank you for inviting me.
My absolute pleasure. I've been trying to get Nick to do one of these for a while because Nick and I have worked together before. Nick, you are going to talk to us about hard FM compliance, and you've sort of got a three-tier approach, which I think people are going to find really, really useful. And this is coming on the back of your 16 years in FM, from kind of in-house to consultant, etc. So you've seen all sides of it. So I know that you live and breathe this. And even though I teach compliance, I have my pen because I know I'm going to learn. So I'm going to hand over to you. Thanks, Nick.
Bless you. It's not good, is it, when you're associated with being a bit of a compliance geek? But you're absolutely right. I for whatever reason, I do love it, and I think it's the variety around it, Beth. I think, and every day is a learning day when it comes to compliance. So no, thank you for the invitation. And when we kind of look at compliance, we are tending to see now that there is a bit of a kind of three-tier approach, or if you would kind of put on a maturity scale, then we see lots of in-house teams and outsourced provisions that fall somewhere between these three tiers that you can kind of put on a maturity scale. And there's a kind of number of reasons or trends that we can talk about and maybe associate with those, and we'll come on to that in a bit. But I think on the kind of one end of the scale, we still come across FM services that are that kind of lacking in expertise and knowledge around compliance. And again, it's important to stress that none of this is through any fault of anyone, and it's definitely not a criticism. It's purely around kind of people's experiences, knowledge, and that type of thing. So there's often rhyme and reason why you end up where you end up, and it's very often not through kind of fault of your own. So we tend to kind of look at compliance in a bit of a coaching and mentoring type style, because actually wherever you are on the end of the scale, you have to kind of adopt those kind of coaching and mentoring type skills to try and help people on their journey, really. And important to stress, no one's perfect. I don't think I certainly wasn't perfect when I was operational, and we've not come across any kind of organization that you would maybe deemed it as being perfect. And so I think that's important context. It's so difficult to achieve compliance, whatever that might mean to you. And we'll come back to that bit as well. But perfection doesn't generally exist. There will always be something because of the moving dynamics of compliance, really.
Well, and it's also that thing about we're 100% compliant, but are you? Are you? You're probably not. So I think you're right. Let's aim for that, but recognise, like you say, no one is perfect. So talk to us about these three tiers.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so on the kind of one end of the scale, we tend to see organisations that don't have a CAFM system, for example. And in this day and age, pretty common now that most folk will have a kind of CAFM system.
And let me pause you. Some people watching this may not know what a CAFM system is, so just give us a 10-year-old description quickly.
No problem. Yeah. So computer-aided facilities management system. So they come in all shapes and sizes, but fundamentally it's a kind of electronic system that drives in this context, your maintenance regimes, may contain your asset register and link your assets to your maintenance tasks and that type of thing. And of course can provide help desk services and space management services, that type of thing. Bit of an old term now, to be honest, CAFM. It's moving more towards integrated work management systems, IWMS. So yeah, bit of a move in that market.
Yeah. So you said the first sort of tier is people who don't have a CAFM system, and I would say, I mean, certainly quite a high percentage of the people I train, depending on the sector, don't have one. So it isn't that uncommon, particularly for older portfolios and things, is it?
Yeah, and I think again, there's often no kind of right or wrong to this stuff. It's there's tools that are at your disposal, so to speak, but we have done some work with the education sector, and they, quite a large educational estate, and they drove the maintenance off of a spreadsheet.
Exactly, yeah.
But the spreadsheet blew my mind. I didn't know how to drive it. It was so complicated that I said, give me a CAFM system. But of course, there are ways and means. But to kind of create this kind of one version of the truth, as we tend to call it, a CAFAM or IWMS system tends to be the way to go nowadays. You talked about asset registers. I joined, as you say, Beth, I joined the industry 16 years ago. Poor asset registers were an issue then. 16 years later, they're still an issue. And you have to ask yourself why. Why can't we kind of crack this nut that is asset registers? And I tend to look at things in terms of kind of tools, processes, and skill sets. Issues you tend to be able to put into one of those kind of buckets. And I'm convinced that asset management as a skill set isn't given the recognition that it should be in our industry. And it is a skill set, and you need the dedicated expertise to do that well, and we just don't recognise that as an industry.
And do you still find in your role that a lot of clients don't have an asset register until they decide to go out to tender for hard FM services, and then when they're asked, well, what do you want me to price for? They're like, oh yeah, no, we need something, and that's when it happens. Is that still happening? Okay.
Yeah. And even the ownership of the asset register, Beth. Who owns your asset register? Well, it should always be you as the client. Regardless if you have an FM service provider, you should always retain the ownership for that asset register. Because it's your data, really. So could talk all day about asset registers. Kind of technical expertise, and I kind of, again, you can kind of put this on a bit of a maturity scale between, kind of caretaker type folk who are there to look after, generally education type buildings, who have a very good handle to some degree on turning the screw, and they know their assets pretty well, but what they may lack is that kind of technical understanding around rules and regulations and British standards and that type of thing. And again, there's as you rightly always say, Beth, there's so much to know. One person cannot know everything, and if you try, you'll end up killing yourself, because it's just mind-blowing really what's out there. So technical expertise or lack of kind of technical expertise. And I kind of put about what does good look like, and when we tend to go, when we go to a new client now, we tend to say, when they go, compliance isn't where it needs to be. Well, what does good look like to you? And try and
what do they say to that?
It's difficult. We say, well, what is compliance to you? And you kind of get these kind of people looking at you going, I'm not really sure. And it's often the simple things, isn't it, that tend to be the breakthrough moments, and certainly what does good look like to you, and what does a compliance mean to you? How do you know when you've achieved it? It sounds a bit silly when you say it out loud, but at the very start, fundamental questions which often need quite a bit of exploring and facilitating. So that's kind of one end.
Okay, nice. That's one end.
We have kind of those who are kind of striving for excellence. So those that have kind of generally got a good general understanding of compliance, have CAFAM systems, have a fairly accurate kind of asset register, have the right people in the right place, which is again is a phrase we use quite a lot. Those that are enough bum on seats, again, which is always an issue, having enough people.
Thing, isn't it? 100%. It really is, absolutely. 100%. And if you look at the number one, people who perhaps don't have a CAFAM system, haven't got the resourcing, is often one of the big issues there as well, isn't it?
100%, yeah. And then on the kind of, I guess, the third kind of bucket, and again, it's a kind of a bit of emerging trend, is particularly in kind of PFI, and for those clients that have got a kind of more intelligent client type model, they are they are striving for perfection, and if perfection isn't kind of reached, then there's some heavy liabilities that are associated with that, and we're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds.
Which they're very aware of as well.
Absolutely, but that that then kind of drives excellence around CAFAM, asset registers, contractor management, processes and procedures. Every kind of cornerstone of compliance and is kind of understood, and we find it difficult sometimes because we go into some clients that need an awful lot of help and are kind of flying under the radar, for want of a better phrase, and then you go to some clients who are under the nth degree of scrutiny and are being kind of penalised heavily, but actually they're a million miles away from those that are on the kind of lower end of the scale, so to speak. So it's a really interesting kind of mix that we get to see. But the enjoyable bit is that you can learn and take the good things that you use from those clients that are excelling, and help that to influence those that need a bit more of a kind of leg up and are on a journey. So
and if you've got people listening to this, which you will, who as you're describing it will think, yeah, well, I probably sit in that first tier, or maybe I'm in the second tier, what everyone wants to do, and you said about how important knowledge is, but there are some people, like you say, perhaps that person with less technical expertise, you gave the example of the guy or person looking after perhaps school properties or something. Fundamentally, I think when it comes to particularly some of the statutory compliance, you don't know what you don't know. So there are people who don't even know they're not doing it. Then there are people who know they're not doing it as well as they should, but they know they should be doing. Do you know what I mean? So that's a scale as well. So where can they go to find out? Where is the help for them? Because there are a lot of people feeling quite anxious, actually.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the term statutory in itself is
yes,
is an interesting term, because actually what the hell do you mean by statutory? And I led a kind of white paper with IWFM back in 2017 where we started looking at this, but sadly kind of ran out of funding to take the kind of scheme forward. But only in the last couple of weeks, BISRIA and IWFM and BISA have come together to try and standardise this term statutory, which I have every respect for. I think that's people coming together to try and harmonise meanings and definitions can only be a good thing. I think the thing that I haven't seen from that output is actually we believe that there's a move towards recognising SFG20's statutory definitions as an industry definition for statutory, and we aren't against that. There's some sense to that, but there's also commercially there's a heavy price tag that kind of goes with that.
Well, I was going to say that. Yeah. So, and that's my issue, is that there are a lot of people that is not accessible to. A lot of people, because there's a big, well, I say big, but there is a price tag on it that some people can't afford.
So I think, to kind of answer your question, I think it can be difficult to kind of go to where is this one single version of the truth that someone who doesn't know or wants to inquire about something, where can they go? And that does remain a real challenge. It's important to kind of surround yourself with people that you can trust. Trusted advisors are really key. But again, you have to do your homework on that, because what they might be saying they're competent, but are they actually competent to give you the advice that you think you're asking for? So not an overly helpful answer, I don't think, but it does go to show the complexity around it, I think.
Yeah, it does. What else is your experience around this in terms of I don't know, just giving people support and sort of reassurance, really, because like you say, it is such a huge subject, but fundamentally it isn't that complicated. It isn't that complicated, and I think there's a lot of fear around compliance, isn't there? Is there anything you can do to sort of help dispel some of that fear for people who are feeling it?
Yeah, I think, and I truly believe this. It's, as you say, it's a kind of a bit of a throwaway word, and people go, "Oh, not compliant." Well, you're saying that, but you don't actually know what you're trying to comply with. You don't actually know when you've reached compliance. So I think going back to basics and truly defining what compliance means to you as an organisation, and there's so much guidance out there. You have to kind of make your own interpretation about legislation, regulations, guidance, approved codes of practice, British standards. Where do they stand in this UK legal hierarchy of documentation? And actually, what are you truly bound by to follow? And that debate rumbles on, really. Some follow British standards to the letter of the law, and SFG20 interestingly, adopts British standards as statutory requirements, whereas in some organisations they'll go, nope, I don't care about British standards. So it's a real challenge. But SFG20s, it is difficult if if you've not got money to kind of use it. But we would advocate SFG20 as a bit of a kind of benchmark and a baseline. We don't often say follow it verbatim because we feel that's almost achievable in terms of the constraints of budgets and such like. But using it as a baseline to kind of check yourself against would always be a bit of advice we would give.
And for anyone listening, in terms of what SFG20 is, because again, let's not assume people know things. Give us a quick, simple, overview.
So SFG20 is it's a kind of maintenance guidance tool, really, and it gives you kind of tasks, task frequencies, and then task methods. So it gives you a way of carrying out maintenance, essentially. But again, the SFG20 is predicated on opening kind of commentary that says this is subject to risk assessment and site-specific requirements. So that's why people tend to go, oh, just follow that. Well, no, it's not. It's not as simple as that. But it does give you a starting point. But of course, it doesn't. If you're looking for true asset management excellence, it doesn't know how you're operating in maintenance manuals for your assets. That would be a huge inventory. It's not that, but it is a starting point for you to go, I should be doing this task on this frequency, and here's a suggested method of how I do it.
And what they've done at SFG20 basically is they've taken the primary and secondary legislation, so the Act and the regulation. They've taken the approved code of practice, which, as many people will know, isn't law, but it's seen as good as, and it something like the workplace regs, where it talks about temperature. If you look at the regulation, it says basically keep the temperature at a reasonable, whatever. You have to go to the approved code of practice that then suggests 16 degrees or 13 degrees. So that gives us the more detail, and something like L8 gives us the technical detail. But then SFG20 also, like you say, refers to the relevant British standards, and it refers to the other industry guidance. And in effect, what has happened at SFG20 is they've read all of this documentation, they've gone shoom, into a system, into a database, and it spits it out. And one of the guides that has been around forever, which isn't always kept up to date, I always do a sort of health warning on that, but the CIBSE Guide M, statutory compliance schedule that sits with that, and it's only obviously just been updated recently, is such a brilliant summary. And it's not kept completely up to date. But I often say to people, if you don't have the budget to go and get SFG20 and subscribe to it, because it's going to be however many, I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, that is a free summary of the key compliance areas, and it then quotes the British Stand or the approved code of practice or something. And I just think for a lot of people that's free and very reassuring as a starting point, isn't it?
I agree, Beth. Yeah, and I think that's where if you look at the statement that the organisations have come out to combine to make in the last couple of weeks, actually where the respective organisations do have their own guidance. So as you say, CIBSE Guide M for BSRIA and for CIBSE, BSRIA have got their own BG guide for statutory compliance. You've then got SFG20, but they all kind of conflict. So if there's a generic approach to it, then there needs to be a one version of the truth where people like you and I can go to and get some consistent advice.
And what a lot of people don't realize, I think, as well with legislation, they think, if you read the legislation, all the answers will be there, but it's so vague, isn't it?
100%, yeah,
it's so vague.
I think that's why. And again, your risk management appetite comes into this massively. And again, risk is not something we're good at managing in the industry. But most people will want to follow and adopt as much as they can from any kind of guidance to make sure that if something does go awry, then they can demonstrate to the beyond reasonable doubt that they've done what they can do. But of course, where there's budget constraints, that understandably cannot be achieved in all occasions. So but it comes back to maintenance strategy. I mean, goodness me, have you ever seen a maintenance strategy within the FM industry? I don't think I have.
Maybe, but not that many.
No. So again, something is a starting tool to kind of go, what is our maintenance strategy? Because that dovetails into compliance,
Yeah,
doesn't it?
and I also think what your point at the beginning about the 3 tiers and having that the tier 1 of, you know, often with less resource, less budgets, sometimes less knowledge. What you do often get with tier 1 is somebody who knows the business inside out and back to front. Do you know what I mean? Who you cut them in half and they'd ooze that school or that workplace, whatever it is. And if you're going to go with the risk management approach, they understand who comes in, how it's used, where the danger points are, what happens on a weekend. You know, they know all that stuff.
Yeah.
So they just need a little bit of support to help them understand, okay, so are we ticking those kind of compliance boxes?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and you know, when we do kind of FM strategy reviews now for clients, I've just done one for a large NHS acute trust, and I was absolutely delighted that they'd had a kind of risk and governance team within their estates and facilities, you know, structure, and that is very uncommon. But given where we are around budget constraints and litigation, you know, that risk skill set, but like asset management skill set, is, in my opinion, is fundamental. And you can't expect your kind of firefighting FMs to be able to do everything. So that needs to be recognised as a skill set.
I like that, you know. I haven't thought about that particularly, and it sounds like a strange thing to say, but to start your compliance strategy with risk, with really being clear on what is our approach to risk, what are we prepared to accept. That's a really I think a very, very useful point for people to think about, actually, and then to move out from there, because there is some choice, isn't there, in terms of what you do.
100%. And I'm you know, I'm a big believer, Beth, and I did a lot of kind of reviewing of case law around, you know, has anyone ever been prosecuted for not following a British standard? And the case law around that was very minimal to almost non-existent, really. But I'm a true believer, and this is not verbatim at all, but can you be criticised for taking a risk-based view on what you do, because you're making an informed decision based on the facts and guidance that surround you within the constraints of the budget you have available, and that good old term, you know, reasonably practicable, cost versus risk, is very prevalent.
And if the organisation has mitigated anything that they determined as being reasonably foreseeable, i.e. likely, and they've had their strategy to cover that, then it's probably quite a strong argument, actually, isn't it?
I wouldn't want to stand up in the court and kind of go through that experience, but I'd like to think that it would stand up. It would stand up to scrutiny.
Yeah. Really, you've given me some food for thought. Actually, really interesting. Anything else before I allow you to get on with your busy afternoon and release you? Anything else that you think would be really useful for people to hear around this subject?
I think, as always, if you don't know, just ask. We are a kind of an industry of people that are expected to know the ins and outs of everything, and you just can't, and you just won't. So we find people take things very kind of personally because they want, because we are FMers, we want to deliver to the best of our ability, but sometimes you have to kind of step back and go, I've got 7 hours, 8 hours a day. What can I reasonably be expected to achieve, and how do I skin the cat differently? And you know, coming back to risk again, I always say use your risk register to your own benefit. You know, if, as you said, you know, if you don't know, you don't know. That's one bit you have to overcome. But if you do know and you're struggling to do anything about it, don't carry that on your shoulders. That's not your burden to carry. And FM folk do carry the weight on their shoulders sometimes. You know, there are tools, and the risk register is a good one for you to use, so that you're sharing that kind of pain or concern with your wider organisation, which I think is only fair.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Nick, is to, like you say, even if you just do a rag, a red, amber, green with your risk register, flagging that up to perhaps some more senior people to help them understand this needs to be taken seriously. We need some support here. Like you say, lift it off your shoulders, because it's a lot of responsibility, and senior people in the business need to know. They need to be supporting and resourcing, don't they?
100%. Yeah. And it does come back to that, Beth. It's simply, tools, process, people.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that those three things, you can achieve everything. But resources is always a challenge. So.
Yeah. In terms of websites, I did a post recently on, I think, LinkedIn, that the HSC website have now moved. Did you see that onto the front page? The A to Z, which is brilliant, because it's for years the A to Z website has been like peeling an onion. It's like, where is what I need? And now it's on the blooming front page. Hopefully they'll keep it there. But whether it's, C for confined spaces, or COSH, or W for work at height, or whatever it might be, that is a starting point, isn't it?
100%.
That they are the people who enforce health and safety, and they are telling us what to do, and they will guide you towards the legislation via those pages. Yeah. So that can be super reassuring for people as well, can't it?
Yeah. And the important thing, it's free. The more you look at trade bodies, the more you have to pay. So any free resource is a good resource.
Yeah. Your knowledge around this area is so huge, and like I say, I think we could talk about this, because we're a bit sad. We could both talk about compliance for hours, but I'm not going to. I'm going to stop us. But I think, like you say, wherever you are on those three tiers, it doesn't matter. It's just recognizing where your gaps are. And I think you've given some really useful strategies for doing that. So, Nick, I am so pleased we've done this. And thank you for sharing your time and your knowledge. And yeah, it's been lovely to have you here.
Thank you, Beth. Thanks a lot.